Mr. Chairman and Ambassador Burns, thank you for your willingness to continue to serve the United States. As I'm sure you're aware, there have been reported cases of anomalous health incidents in China, also known as Havana syndrome cases. Have you been briefed on the reported cases in China?
Senator, I do not have a security clearance, so I've not been briefed in detail about what has happened to our mission personnel there, but I've had unclassified, open conversations with the State Department, and what I would say to you is my own view, just as a private citizen, is that this is real. It's happening to our diplomats and other government personnel all around the world, and if confirmed, my obligation to you, and more particularly to the men and women of our mission in China, is to do everything under my power to protect them, working with the Secretary of State and all of our other officials.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I hope you will also request from the State Department, once confirmed, that classified briefing that also includes how to encourage personnel to respond if they are affected and what to look for in terms of those attacks, because to date, there doesn't seem to be a consistent response and direction for personnel.
Thank you.
You mentioned in your opening remarks and in the questioning about the increased Chinese influence in Eastern Europe and also Lithuania, which is one example of an Eastern European country that has taken a hard stance on China. In July, they actually became the first European country to allow a Taiwanese diplomatic presence using the island's name in the country. Can you talk about what you think the impact of Lithuania's stance is? We know it's produced a response from China, but will it have impact on other Eastern European countries and encourage them to take a hard look at what China's doing?
Thank you. Lithuania has chosen its course, and every country has a right to define its relationship with Taiwan. And I'm proud that the Biden administration has stood up for Lithuania. And, you know, it's extraordinary. The Chinese government has launched an intensive intimidation campaign, economic intimidation of Lithuania, and the Lithuanians have stood up and they've held their ground. They deserve our support, as Australia does, and Australia has been subjected to the same treatment. We have our own policy, the One China policy, which we should adhere to, our unofficial relationship with Taiwan, which has served us well. Every other country should have a right to determine what they want to do, and they shouldn't be bludgeoned and bullied by the Chinese leadership.
Well, thank you very much. I couldn't agree more with that, and I think Lithuania deserves a lot of credit for a small country being willing to stand up in the way that they have. Excuse me. Earlier this month, NATO Secretary Jens Stoltenberg insisted that NATO must engage politically with China, but the alliance doesn't seem to see China as much of a threat as they do Russia. Does China view NATO in the same way? And what do you think NATO's strategy should be towards China?
Thank you, Senator. It's been really interesting for me as a former ambassador to NATO to see how high on the agenda China has become over the last couple of years during President Trump's time and now President Biden's time. And the focus is right. I mean, certainly Russia is the immediate focus of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and especially considering Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and Poland right up on the front lines as we try to contain Russian power. But I think the NATO countries, led by a great Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg, also understand China, as the Belt Road Initiative, is now in 16 countries in Eastern Europe. The Chinese are actively trying to separate countries in Eastern Europe from the European Union and NATO. And if you think about Chinese energy activities and military activities in the Eastern Mediterranean Sea, which is part of the NATO littoral geography, and think about the interests of Germany, of France, Italy, any of the NATO countries, they've got to be concerned by what's happening in Xinjiang province, in what's happened to Hong Kong, the threats against Taiwan, and the economic practices of China. My last point would be, if we can coalesce with the European Union, the United States, and Japan on some of the economic issues, we're well more than 60% of GDP. It's real leverage. So Europe has to be part of this strategy, and I credit the Secretary General, I credit Ambassador Kay Bailey Hutchison who was our great American ambassador under President Trump, she pushed this issue, and she was right to do that.
And do you think China has become concerned about NATO's increasing interest in what China is doing in Europe? Or are they ignoring that?
I don't think they're ignoring it, Senator. I mean, the reason I use the term China's not an Olympian power in my statement, and I meant it specifically, they have enormous strengths. They have very few friends. They have no real allies. And think of the strategic advantage we have with our 29 allies in Canada, the Europeans in NATO, and our multiple treaty allies in the Indo-Pacific. It is our comparative advantage, and I think President Biden has been working overtime with Secretary Blinken to reach out to the allies, both in NATO and the Indo-Pacific, to say we need to be working together strategically on China.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Let me just quickly echo Senator